Welcome, everybody.
Hey everyone, welcome to today's live stream. So today we have Lucia, and she's gonna show you how to make a dynamic custom developer portfolio with popular SaaS APIs using Graphql Studio. So yeah, I give it up to Lucia.
Yeah, Roy is joining us today. He is somewhat of a GraphQL expert, and I'm really happy to have him with us here at this workshop. We will be using StepsN to make a custom portfolio site generator, as Roy said. If you don't know what StepsN is, it is a service that helps you create a GraphQL layer for your application without resolvers. Instead, we take a directive-first approach. As you can see here on the homepage, we have directives like dbquery, REST, and at GraphQL that help you connect to different types of backends. Today, we'll be using REST and GraphQL because the Twitter and Dev2 APIs that we'll be using to feed dynamic data into the website are REST APIs, and the GitHub API is a GraphQL one. I do encourage you to sign up so that you can follow along. We'll be using an endpoint that doesn't require sign up to use, but I find that for key management, a StepsN account is super helpful. This is the, whoops. So when you click on the StepsN logo in GraphQL Studio, it takes you back to the StepsN page. So this is the GraphQL Studio from StepsN. It has a bunch of curated APIs, so APIs for which we have created specialized GraphQL schemas, and you can practice querying them in the studio using mock data. So say I selected the agility backend, then I could run and get and see the shape of the data that I can back, so I get an idea of what I wanted in my front end. Today we're using one of the pre-selected schema combinations. It's called the Developer Publishing Pack. So we've got Dev2, GitHub, and Twitter. I'll use mock data for this one too, but I'll show you. Oops, let me just put that back in there. If I wanted to configure them, I could add in my keys there. So as you can see, we will be running a dev2 get articles query, and this query is going to kind of feature prominently in our project. We will also be able to surface information from the GitHub and Twitter APIs inside this same query using a directive that we'll get into in a little minute. As you can see, we can run these three queries all at the same time. Let's see. Just run that. There we go. And get information back from Dev2, GitHub, and Twitter. There is a schema behind all of these that you can check out just by clicking this tab. We'll be in here later. You can see here that because I'm getting mock data back, there is a at mock directive that StepsN is using to let basically let the service know that we are looking to get mocked data back from the API in the shape that we need. Roy, please feel free to interrupt and add anything you want as we go along today. One more thing that I'd like to get into before we start digging into the schemas is this endpoint here. This is the endpoint we'll be querying later. If you would like to get these schemas onto your own machine and start playing with them, you can click publish and then click download and build, and the file with the GraphQL schemas will be downloaded to your machine. Let's go back kind of and go over what the overall project structure of what we're going to be looking at today. So we are, let me zoom in actually, so that you can see this better. What we'll be doing today is we're going to be following a kind of project structure that was invented by Cassidy Williams over at Netlify. She had a template for custom sites and then created a generator site that deployed the template using the deploy to Netlify button. And then you could make little custom sites off of that. She used Vite, I believe, and Vue. And then we translated ours into Next and Alpine. So it'll be fun to dig around in those different front-end frameworks. This is a model that makes custom sites with static data. So in order to inject dynamic data into the website, we used a steps and endpoint connection so that each custom site would respond dynamically to changes in the APIs. So let's get started looking at the template for custom sites. Oops, I don't want to exit the full screen. Okay, so this is right away, you're going to see this endpoint that I pointed out in the studio that we're pinging with fetch. Another thing I want to point out is that we've got these environment variables up here, and they are necessary to make this application work. We'll see them again later in the generator. And I think it's really important to see how they cascade through the app and how they really provide the power here. We have them in a .env. I'm going to show you the sample so that you can see how they're named. They're prefixed with next, not next public. That would make them available to the client, right? But that's just so that they can be available to us in the process here. Next up, we've got a rather long query, but as you can see, it's the same one that we were making in the studio. So we're getting articles, and we'll also be getting details on the user. And we'll be surfacing the GitHub details and the Twitter details of the dev2 user. And the way that we can do that is we use a custom directive in the schema called Materializer. So I am going to take you back to the studio for a moment, and we can kind of hunt around in the schema, and I'll show you the Materializer that is. Doing the magic on the back end. So let's find our articles. I think it's dev2 user is the type that I'm looking for though. So bear with me one moment. Okay, so in here, I will highlight this because it's a little bit difficult to see in the live stream sometimes when it gets minimized. You can see on GitHub details, we have this custom directive called @Materializer, and it's kind of like the @Rust or @DBQuery directive in that it's a steps and custom directive, but in this case, it materializes something for a field rather than connecting us directly to a backend. So this is going to execute the GitHub user query on the GitHub API. And the value that it's going to use is the GitHub username from this dev2 user type. Same thing for the Twitter details field. It uses Materializer to execute the Twitter user query on the Twitter API. And then it'll use the Twitter username value in order to fill in that username param that Twitter query requires. So that's what is going on in the SDL to make all of this possible. Okay, next up, we're sending our variables into the fetch request, and we're returning the data. Then after that, we are generating a component that maps my top 3 dev2 articles to the user interface. So let's see how that looks in real life. There we go. You can see it coming in from the dev2 API, the last articles by popularity there. Now I'm going to uncomment this code, which is basically generates the components for the Twitter and GitHub cards. So let's take a look. And you can see in there that I have my top pinned GitHub repos and a pinned tweet. So in order to really understand that this data is dynamic, I'm going to do a quick demo. I'm going to have my Twitter profile over here in another screen. And I'm going to change my top pinned tweet. So I'm going to unpin, and then I will pin something else. What looks good? There we go. Let's pin that one. Okay, and then that should change. There we go. Now I've got a separate pinned tweet. So really the magic of this here is that I don't have to go into my portfolio website, right, and then change up the code. That's the problem with static portfolio sites, is that your life is not static and you're always achieving new things and creating new content, and it's just really hard to keep up with feeding all of that into your portfolio site. So this is really helpful because you don't even have to go into the code behind it in order to keep it updated. You can just do things like update your own Twitter, and then it'll get fed right in. So that was, let's see, which blog post am I looking at? Here. So that was all within this yellow box here. The next thing that we want to do is to take a look at our generator site and how that works. Do we have any questions, Roy?
No, I do have a question myself. So if you tweet something new now, you won't directly see it, right? Because we're using Next.js and are we building at static time, or do we have like server-side request?
Yeah, no, we have server-side requests, so it should update as soon as I make that pin. So if I'm going over to my deployed version of that site, let's see, I think it's this one, yeah. You can see that it automatically updates. So you don't have to refresh or redeploy.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. I really enjoy that part too, because it not only do you not have to change the code like I mentioned, but you don't have to redeploy either. So
yeah, I believe this with Gatsby you can only get data server side, or not really server side, but during build time. So it's cool. With Next.js you can also get it server side.
Yeah, no, that's one of the reasons I enjoy working with Next.js for sure. But yeah, that's also why Next.js and StepZen work really well together, I think. It's because StepZen is another dynamic data source that, and it just gets you that data immediately. So yeah. So that template was what's inside the yellow box. We're not over to deploying our custom site yet, right? We're going to make a generator site. And that I have in my repository here. So this is a little bit different. It's an Alpine.js file. And Alpine.js basically has, it's like JavaScript methods inside your HTML elements. Forgive my need to go in and space things out a little bit more evenly here, so forgive that. But basically what we're doing here is we're creating a form, and inside that form we have a button that takes in these variables. These look familiar. These are the variables from the custom site that we had. So this is how we're going to end up feeding those tokens and the username into Netlify in order to deploy custom sites. And those environment variables will live on Netlify rather than just inside the repository. This is kind of a long string, so I'm going to explain a little bit what's going on here, because this is the string behind the deploy to Netlify button. So this deploy parameter will take in, this repository parameter takes in the repository you want to deploy. So that is where our custom site template lives. with all of our Dev2 Twitter and GitHub details on it. Next, we have these hashes and these variables, and those, again, are the environment variables, and Netlify will know about those that way. We see we have this .username, this .github token, and this .twitter token. That is, those are fed into the form with these Alpine methods. Let's see if I can find an example here. That is good. So where is xdata? So this xdata method receives the values of username, GitHub token, and Twitter token from these X model methods that are placed on the input. So whatever you put in this input element will be the value for the string here. So if I write in searchy on this input element, then it will be the value for this .username up here, if that makes sense. Do you have questions about that, Ray?
I was wondering one thing. So we had a Next.js website before, and now we have this file. It's specific for Netlify, right?
This file is it. But well, can you say more about what you mean by specific for Netlify?
We just built something in Next.js.
Right.
And now we have this file, right, which is static HTML.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So how did we get from the Next.js to this file? Was it something we generated, or is it like two separate things which you'll need for deployment?
Okay. So yeah, these are two separate things. This is an Alpine project. And let me show you it running in localhost. So this is a separate form, and that's the generator site here. So it links to the template, but it's a completely separate repository from the template. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, indeed. So if people want to get started with this code, they can either go to the generator repository and then generate something themselves, or they can use the interface, right?
Right. So you could use, say, like a code first approach if you wanted to edit the styles or something, or if you're happy with the way that the template is, then you can just tap in your values into the generator site and it will deploy a template for you.
That's really cool. So you're actually able to build a generator for portfolio sites through StepSend, like in probably not that much time.
Yes. Yeah. No, it took me maybe a couple days, and most of that was figuring out deploy to Netlify and things. So yeah, it's pretty fun. It's been one of the most fun projects I think I've done this year. And what made it fun was discovering how it worked, like how the two repositories were related, like we were just talking about, and how to make these instances dynamic here using the StepSend endpoint. So the next step that I want to do is demo the generator site. So we're going to look at a deployed version of this form here. I will put in my username, but then I will stop sharing my screen so that I can put in my tokens. I will share again in a moment when I'm ready. So what I'm doing right now is I am getting the keys that I need in order to deploy the website to Netlify, and then we'll be able to watch it deploy at Netlify.
That's great. I also shared the code for the generator in the chat. So if someone wants to see it, awesome. You can find it right there. And I've also shared the link to the generator that you can use once it's already deployed. So you can use it there to create your website.
Nice. I'm going to reshare my screen. Okay, so I just hit the deploy to Netlify button on the deployed version of this form, and it brought me to this screen. So the next thing we need to do is connect to GitHub. And I am already signed into Netlify, so I don't need to do anything particularly special besides hit that button. And then we're going to name it something different because I believe I have like several custom site templates living in the same area. We'll hit save and deploy, and that will deploy my website. All right, so this deploy takes a little bit of time. So while it's deploying, I will summarize what we've done so far, and then we can take any questions that we have. So first of all, we've taken a look at StepSend. We've seen the GraphQL Studio. We took a look at the developer publishing pack, which is this endpoint that connects 3 different APIs into one. And then we've seen that in action inside a Next.js front end that makes a custom site template. Then we headed over to a completely different folder of code and saw an Alpine form that makes it possible to deploy many different instances of this dynamic website. Now we're seeing how the deploy works in real life. So this can take a few minutes. Do you have anything you'd like to talk about when it comes to Netlify and StepSend, Roy?
Well, I'm always amazed like how quickly you can build something and then actually deploy it. I mean, when I started programming, I had to literally drag and drop things to an FTP folder, or through the terminal, put them somewhere, and then do something. And I believe we didn't even have production and staging things back then. So it was just try and merge things to FTP, through the FTP server to production, see where you could change them. So we definitely came a long way.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, when I started programming, we had Netlify, so it was.
For developer tools, it's a great day to be alive.
Yeah, it's pretty. It's pretty easy to get things up and running, but sometimes I feel that I wish I had started coding a little bit earlier in the timeline so I could understand the progress we've made. But I'm sure we'll keep progressing and learning different things, and I'll be able to tell my own stories in 10 years or so. So.
Yeah, definitely. Probably if you ask in 10 years, then people are amazed that you even need to press a button to deploy something.
Right. You didn't just think about it or look at it in your AI glasses or whatever.
Yeah, that would be great. So for this part, you're going to show the deployed version, right? And then what it actually deploys, it's the output of the Next.js website, right? Or is it the output of the Alpine website?
It is the output of the Next.js website. So
yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, so we just clicked the button on the Alpine website, and then that brought us over to Netlify.
And then it will generate the template for your website through the generator, right? So in Next.js.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Can you tell me which command will be run? Is it like a yarn build or something, or?
There's actually once it deploys, we can just it'll just work from there. It's just taking a little while today because there we go. So ta-da! There we go. That's the deployed version of the website. So what we just did was we clicked the button here. Once we filled in the token values, that brought us over to Netlify, and then that built and deployed our website.
And basically, we'll just run the build command from Next.js, right?
Yes, you do have to do that once, and then it'll use that one build and it'll deploy that. But it should only be one time once you have the code that you want.
Yeah, nice. And what would happen if maybe your GitHub isn't connected or your tweets won't load?
Right. If your tweets don't load, I saw an earlier version of that today when I was deploying and I put in a wrong username. And you might get an error that says like, we couldn't find this user. That's error handling that comes like on the front end from the custom site template. If your GitHub doesn't connect with Netlify, it's been a while since I ran into that with Netlify, so I'm not sure what would happen. You would get an error though at the deploy step, and then it would be time to go look at your Netlify account and see what your Netlify settings and your GitHub settings are. I definitely recommend getting a Netlify account before trying to replicate this process. It would smooth things out, I'm sure, with the flow.
Yeah, cool. And it's also nice to see. So we can also even think about more APIs you want to add in the future.
Right. Yeah. I'm wondering about like, I don't know if Hashnode has an API, but it would be fun maybe to use Notion if you can surface Notion content to a portfolio. What kind of things would you add?
Well, Hashnode has a GraphQL API, so it could be cool because maybe some
Yeah,
people aren't using Dev. So how would that work? So
that's
you have
great.
Graphql Studio, you have our local project. If I want to change any of those APIs, where would I start?
So if you wanted to change one of those APIs, that's a really good question. I would probably go to the GraphQL Studio, and I would say I wanted to add like, I don't know, I had an Airtable with information or maybe a contentful thing with information. Then I would end up publishing this endpoint and using that. And then I could, from there, and I would play around with the queries first to make sure I could get the query that I wanted. That's why mock data is helpful for me. And then after using that, I could query that endpoint and then use my own query here just to surface that content full information, and then the logic for the Next.js components would kind of waterfall out of that. So this
Cool.
studio really it's a good starting point for dreaming up projects, because you can kind of see it, well, like, what data do I have, what's available to me, before you even get into the code or writing the schema yourself.
Yeah, nice. And I can also download the entire schema, right? And then set up my own server and maybe put in some of the APIs that aren't supported yet.
Yeah. So you're not limited, certainly, to these schemas. There's a lot of commonly used ones, but say, you did want to put in Notion, then you could download the schema to your own computer and add your own Notion schema and then connect it together.
Oh, nice.
And that would all be, and then you could use, since you're using StepZen, you could use the custom directives like Materializer to connect all of your schemas together, both your custom ones and the ones that you have downloaded from the studio.
Yeah, it sounds great.
Yeah.
And then you can also mix it with the data we already have, right? So you're not limited to having just data from one API, but instead you can also make the connections with the APIs that we already curated for you.
Yes, exactly. It's pretty convenient. So to summarize, we've started off in the GraphQL Studio. We used the endpoint to populate data to a Next.js front end. Then in a separate repository, we created a form that connects to the template repository by a link, and then it deploys instances of it using the deploy to Netlify button. I'm going to I'll stop sharing my screen here because I have some links that I would like to share. Let me go to StreamYard. There we go. So These links are links to the studio, links to that blog post that I was using to describe the project, and then links, of course, to the repositories, because if you're like me, you like to clone down the repository first and just get into it. There's a Discord invite if you're curious about StepSend and have questions. You can use that link. And then if you would like some stickers and you'd like to run maybe even your first GraphQL query, you can go to stepsend.com/stickers and get some free stickers sent to your place. All right, that's all I have for today. What about you, Roy?
Yeah, thanks, Lucia. Yeah, the stickers are great actually. I think I have them. I have them somewhere here. We have this basic stickers and some nice GraphQL StepSend ninjas. So definitely recommend doing that. And most of all, I think if you were inspired today, you think you want to make this repository, try it out. But especially join the Discord, because that's really the place to connect with me, connect with Lucia, connect with the other people, and ask your questions.
Yes. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you, Roy.
Thanks, everyone. So that will be it. And we hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.